Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. I am John, your host, and we have once again a great returning and contributing monthly guest, Daniel Mesrobian, who is joining us. And as we always look forward to his insights on all things political and financial, and especially with the global currency reset, we're all widely watching and anticipating, and we'll get his insights on all of that and much more as it relates to Canada and the potentiality of them becoming a 51st state. If you are new to the podcast, please do like, subscribe, and share. This helps the channel grow and others to gain in the knowledge you're being afforded.
I was the CFO of a private corporation, but I have worked in senior capacities in the Canadian banks,
Okay.
both in the corporate banking network and in the underwriting
Okay.
business.
Good to know. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you.
So, for instance, just to give you some background,
Please.
I have been a former central banker, working as in a junior capacity as an economist, but I've worked in the central bank.
Okay.
I've been the CFO of a major company. I've been the treasurer of a major crown corporation, and I've had a lot of international experience as a corporate banker. So that kind of fills you in a bit.
Folks, for over a year now, we've been extolling the virtues of buying precious metals. As you can see, Fort Knox is about to be audited, and that's imminent, and you're going to see that gold reserves are little to none. What do you think that'll do to the price of gold? And with silver being ransacked with COMEX on the markets, that's sure to follow as well. The only question is, are you going to take action or not? If you haven't, what are you waiting for? And if you have, please take a moment to visit one of our great sponsors here below, the link in the description, and call for the information. It's free. The consultation is free. The cost of not taking advantage of this has lasting consequences, folks. Please tell them John and Chris sent you. You'll be more than happy that you did. Thank you for clarifying. So you know how basically the old system in the deep state works, which is perfect because you can help guide us to, where we're headed. But before we get to that, I did want to show you, you and I talked about some things offline. I did want to show you a couple things and get your insights on them, and it'll lead us into the conversation that we need to have. So let's start with this. This was pretty compelling to me. Let me know when you can see this. Apparently, this person here, Raven Moonstone, and some other people, Google is reaching out to random Gmail subscribers, letting them know that they have changed their status from Canada to the United States, which I thought was pretty interesting and compelling to get your take on that. And then this other thing I want to show you real quick, this other article here. A couple different things actually. So this is an interesting post that came out from Mark Van Compernole on X. Apparently, AOC's brother has been trafficking fentanyl, which President Trump has been campaigning against and lobbying against for quite some time. Apparently, a Nike racing boat carrying her brother Matthew is also carrying 1.2 million worth of fentanyl when the U.S. Coast Guard boarded it in Lake Superior. And they had credible information of a drug buy from Vice Admiral Joe Barron. So they basically did a pretty big drug bust, but it really breaks up the political corruption of the Democrat deep state we've all known for some time. Just another demarcation in it. And then that leads, Daniel, to the thing that you really want to talk about, and we're going to explore more deeply here, which is what you shared with me today, lab leak, which is the true origins of COVID-19. I think everybody kind of knows that was done in a lab in Wuhan years ago by Dr. Fraudchi, as we call him. And that has many implications. So as I scroll down the article, why don't you kind of share with us your insights and concerns and what new findings you've discovered in the light of this?
So as we were just sort of chatting offline, John, this announcement on the 18th was quite seminal for me, because it changes the framework of analysis, and it forces you to recast a lot of information that we've been collecting since, I would say, the seminal date of March 11th, 2020, which is the date of the declaration of the pandemic. It forces you to start looking through different lenses, and perhaps President Trump's comment about Canada's a 51st state is really that nudge that says, well, look, if you were the president of the United States, the optic that you view most of the time is going to be through the lens of national security. And perhaps more importantly, not just under the lens of national security, but from the point of view that you're constantly under some kind of threat or some kind of attack. Now that that's been confirmed by the president, this is an act of war.
Right.
Okay. It changes your analysis, and it changes how, from my point of view, how you view data. And so the first question becomes, have we had a mass casualty event? First and foremost, if there'd been an attack, at least one attack, maybe multiple attacks. And it also reframes this comment of the 51st state, because if I were looking through the lens of national security and I had, the thankless job of running the United States, I'd be looking north to my northern border, which parenthetically is the longest border in the world, 5,500 miles compared to under 2,000 for the US. I'd be saying, well, I'd be posing questions about national security, because I can see that there's an effective judiciary. I can see that there's open drug trafficking going on. And as we've discussed before, there are at least a couple of provinces that where the property registries are being used as both piggy banks and money laundering facilities for a lot of this movement. It could be drugs, or it could be more. So there is a national security issue in Canada. And now that it's clear that there was an act of war, we have to review the data, and we have to look at it through a different lens. I think that's the point I'm trying to make.
No, I think you're right. So, as you know, President Trump just met, I believe, last week with the optical Mark Carney from your country. We know is deep state. And there was this whole sort of optical, for lack of a better term, pissing contest going back and forth, like, oh, you're going to be a 51st state. Never, never, never. Oh, Trump saying never say never. With what you're talking about, with the ruse of this actually being an act of war, which would be treason, essentially. What is your conclusion now in light of this new information? And do you think that does, in fact, bring Canada closer to being a 51st state?
Well, look, I don't know about the outcome of the 51st state, but what I can tell you is that it further underlines the fact that the shift in power in Canada has been entirely in the favor of those that have taken control. I mean, to the extent that a lot of our financial assets have been, quote unquote, alienated from us. I'm going to use the example of the Workmen's Compensation Fund in Ontario, $37 billion fund that really looks like it's more like a financialized insurance company now than it is a compensation board. And, we spent some time on that, and we've done quite a bit of research on that. But the entire movement to financialize government services has created these funds that have largely come under the control of fund managers. And guess now who's in control of Canada? A chief funds manager. So what better way to keep control of the assets you've taken control of than to put the chief fund manager in charge of the country? So you can see that as soon as you start looking at things at Canada from a national security point of view, the image changes, and things start looking quite different and quite better organized and quite strategic in a manner that you just hadn't seen before when you were looking at the country through a political lens. So, if this analysis has weight, you do come to this conclusion that if a country like Canada is utterly lacking in a functioning judiciary, in borders that have become transparent to organized crime, you've got a major, and perhaps quite worse, and I'm talking here like attacks on US election infrastructure. So you've got a security problem you've got to deal with, and that's what Canada rapidly starts looking like when you paint it in the context of a fifth generation war. And I could be wrong, but that may be what the president of the United States was alluding to. And that's maybe the cue for Canadians to start looking at their country through a different lens.
Right. And as you know, Daniel, this whole thing, I mean, President Trump always puts out very deep comms and breadcrumbs, as you're aware, and our audience is aware. It's not accidental. Everything is very, very calculated and precise. And this is, I think, to wake up the majority of the people so that he can get more people on board with it, apart from the resources and all that. You have mentioned it, Norman has mentioned it, that the US military has a very large presence in Canada in terms of protection. So it would just seem to be, at least from our vantage point, that that's where this is all headed towards making Canada 51st state. And then you have areas like I think it's Alberta and correct me if I'm wrong, Saskatchewan that are lobbying for this, from what we understand. Is that right?
Well, look, there is a current movement afoot. Because let's step back for a
Sure.
moment and take a look at a bit of the history.
Okay.
If we were to reconstruct events over the last a longer period of time, I would use 50 years, okay? And that would be the period from 1974 to 2024, which is bookended by two prime ministers who had the same last name. And over that period, you see an evolution of Canada. Um, and uh, and you see markers that are you also see in other parts of the world effectively that you've got a division of a country around a region that distinguishes itself as being different and draws resources from the rest of the country. Um, so this is not unlike the situation between Russia and uh, and Ukraine, although that's more of an extreme example because that's a militaristic solution that was sought. But this is the kind of template that's being used in common warfare around the world in what I would call, the template for communism, global communism 2.0. And we've suffered from that in Canada. So this movement by the largest have province, which is Alberta, is can be well viewed within that context because what you've had happening over the last, well, as I say, 50 years is a good period. You just have to look back over the last 15 years. And if you look at the interprovincial flows, financial flows in Canada, the transfer payments, what you'll see is that poor Alberta has been milked for huge amounts, well in excess of 220 billion over that period. And most of that has gone to one region in Canada, which actually the numbers show have pulled in over 300 billion. So you've got this massive inequity. And yeah, so Alberta and a have province like Saskatchewan is probably saying they've had enough, but that was the objective of what I would say this game, this war gaming. It is to split the country, and it is to get it to a point where people really start complaining, and there's a risk to national unity. And we are there.
Okay, so it sounds like Daniel, what you were sharing in the last point you made. It's a lot of this in life is timing is everything, right? Whether it's a business relationship, a personal relationship, um, you know, starting a family, all of it is really predicated on timing. And everything that I'm hearing you say sounds like Canada as a collective, much like in the US, but like the world, is waking up. And it seems like the timing is good or rife now for a revolution or a wholesale change to happen in Canada. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, and hopefully, I think you've cast it in the right light there, John, that if we are coming to our senses and if we are seeing the world more clearly, then yeah, we're realizing that our circumstances now really are just a continuation of what we've been living for the last certainly 3 to 5 decades. But we've reached like this apotheosis. It's a hump we have to get over. That
Yeah.
if we can't solve our own national deficiencies and our divisions, then the default is that for national security reasons alone, if I were the leader of the US, I, I would want to impose some control. I would do that by means of annexing Canada. So I understand that point of view.
Interesting.
Hopefully, we're going to be able to avoid it.
Well,
But I think Canadians should recognize that we do represent a national security risk, probably the top one or two to our American partners. And that's a fact. It's hard to not come to that conclusion.
Well, I mean, ultimately, things have to change for the better, Daniel. As you said, you're at a point of no return, and we all have to get to that point of the mental and emotional Rubicon, as you said, crossing over that dividing line. That we can't stay the way we are. It's not sustainable on so many levels.
But I think we have so much in common, aside
Mhm.
from, our territorial and our continental commonalities, our cultural commonalities, but also, um, I mean, I hate to use the framework of a victim, but both of our countries have been subject to an assault, um, which I'm calling a mass casualty event. So it's not just Canadians that have an interest in getting to the bottom of this. Our Americans, brothers and sisters, they've got an interest there too. And I know those voices, many of them are even stronger than the ones we hear in Canada. Unfortunately, we're all laboring under what I think you would call almost full spectrum, uh, algorithmic suppression. It's very, very hard to get the kind of discussion we're having here out into the public audience. And then even to discuss some of the scientific aspects to this, that's uh, that's another challenge under the current circumstances we face.
Yeah. So for all those reasons, it just continues to highlight a need for a wholesale change. To your point. Um,
Agreed.
and this is a long, protracted conversation. Obviously, we could go on waxing poetic for quite some time, but we just want to give our audiences, respectively, sort of a targeted view of the main, sort of overarching points, and which you're doing, which we appreciate. So there's no easy way to sort of transition or change the subject or segue. So you have to give me some rope, folks, with that. But we also want to tap into another area that is your bread and butter milieu expertise, which is the financial side. So we've talked a lot about the global reset. You've agreed on the validity of it and the inherent importance of it. The first question I have for you, Daniel, is how significant was last week's meetings with President Trump in the Middle East? What was your takeaway from those events?
Um, Look, I wasn't privy to those meetings, and from the markers I see in the open marketplace, I didn't see a huge reaction. As a matter of fact, the thing that's stunning to me um, is how relatively stable the major currencies are within their trading channels right now. I mean, we have seen a weakening of the dollar index, which is what we'd expect, given what the president's been saying. But the amount of the relative stability of the system is what I find most surprising. So I don't see any overt signs of big reactions. And I could be wrong there. I would stand to be corrected. I would love to be corrected.
Well, I think it has a lot to do with what you're contributing. All our guests contribute. It's point of view and it's interpretation, right? And you've seen it from a very, in terms of the Keynesian system, a very sustainable historic point, protracted point of view. What our takeaway was, Daniel, to complement what you're saying, was he did a lot of deals with energy, AI, manufacturing, bringing a lot of that back stateside to the U.S., which with a merge with Canada as a 51st state potentially could be a huge benefit to you and certainly will be to us stateside. But he also freed up Syria from sanctions. And he's in the process, I don't know if you're aware, he's in the process, we've reported this on our Telegram, of doing that right now with Iran. Iran has agreed optically to a nuclear ceasefire, which really in its genesis, Daniel, is to get the hands of Iran off of Iraq, which frees up the dinar. You also have Vietnam. I don't know if you saw it today, but he's planning on putting a Trump Tower hotel in Ho Chi Minh City in the next 4 years. Not going to be doing that unless Vietnam's country is going to be wildly prosperous and the trade imbalance is going to be rectified. So you got a lot of movements there. But it's in terms of the stability that I think you're talking about, I think that's largely attributable to BRICS and that everything is housed under the unit. And he's doing as seamless of a transition as possible, albeit with, as you said, the dollar index and oil, I might add, is marginally going down. Texas crude a week and a half ago was $56. So that's all part of taking the singular dependence of oil away from the Middle East. They've been living off that illusion for a while. They've been able to obfuscate all of their assets that they have in terms of, mineral rights and precious metals and the like. You're well familiar. That's now going to have to become front and center transparent. But I think the real key, Daniel, is dealing with Iran from a geopolitical, but more importantly, financial standpoint, is going to force their hand off their little brother Iraq to allow them to free up and many other parts in the Middle East.
Well, I can't claim to have much subject matter expertise in Middle East finance.
Sure.
So I'm going to have to rely on your analysis, John.
Well,
But as I say, I will repeat the point that what I find stunning in this environment where we have so many uncertainties, and uncertainty is something you can't hedge against, is there appears to be a normalization of major indexes. And I'm talking about here, if you look at the US long rates, they're moving to about what one would expect. It's almost like returning to the free money period now.
mhm.
And I think, and as I say, the relative currency relationships are also reinforcing that view. So that's what I find most striking right now, because in this period of uncertainty, I would have expected markets to be far more chaotic with a lot more volatility and a lot more corporate casualties than we're seeing.
Well, I think that's coming, and we'll touch on that in a minute. But I just want to add to something you said, that I appreciate your trust in what we're sharing, but it's really the brilliance of our team collectively, the men and women that I work alongside that put this information together, because no man does it or woman does it on an island alone. So I want to acknowledge them in the throes of this discussion. I'm sort of just the mouthpiece for them in many respects. But that's number one. Number two, I think we do, with what President Trump, I should say, he is doing, is it's leading down a pathway, right? As part of this global reset, he's getting the public comfortable and on board and used to the notion and idea that we never needed taxes, unconstitutional, which will remove the 14th and 16th Amendment. In doing so, auditing what he's going to do transparently with Musk, Fort Knox, right, will bring us to the point of auditing the Fed as people see their energy costs going down, as they see they don't have to work if they're working overtime, things like that. They're not going to get taxed on tips, no taxes on overtime. They're going to have a better it mitigates the cost of energy, which mitigates the cost of food and gas, which gives them a better quality of life, more, for lack of a better term, bang for the dollar, if you will, to give them sustainability as we transition to the hyperinflation from a dead Fed dollar to a US note, and ultimately removing the Fed, which removes the private Western central bank, is how you're going to see those things. What we're watching for, Daniel, in a more, it might be a short-term view, next 3-4 months, but we're watching for a flash crash of some type with the stock market, probably from what our team can ascertain in September, which will probably give you more of the optical touch points that you're looking for to see some of the fallout.
Well, it might be necessary to have touchstone events in this scenario that we're going through right now. But I think that one of the things that's common to both the U.S. and Canada, and we're not alone, I think it's rampant right now, is that we have embedded structural corruption in our governance. And that is, as we discussed the last time, that also brings to bear price burdens on citizens. And a lot of the price burdens we're carrying, whether it's in the energy sector, whether it's across various sectors, a lot of that is government-linked cost loads that are being pushed through to us. And especially over this COVID period, which I'm describing as a wartime period, but we've had this huge cost run up, which is not unlike what happens in wartime scenarios, and it's embedding itself in our economy. And if we're not careful about this, and this is the same signal I gave last time, is that we're setting up a situation where we're embedding costs that are going to grow. And these costs are based on essentially fake numbers, fake science, and fake premises. And until we get that out of our system, that's a constant load on citizens and it's a constant load on our economy. And that's a cost of corruption. And that has to be a priority. So whether you're using a mechanism like Doge, or whether you're using any kind of intelligent mechanism, and our systems now are so, our government systems are so complex that we essentially need AI to understand the information coming out of these application systems. That's got to be one of the first attack vectors to get our countries back into our own hands. That, of course, and cleaning up our election systems and cleaning up our courts.
Mhm.
So we have a lot of work in front of us, and and a lot of this is national security concerns, and that's why I'm getting back to the comment that the president made. I'm kind of hoping that that's really the path he's pushing us down, to start viewing the world the way he has to view it.
I think he is. I think he's one of those rare people that actually means what he says and says what he means, you know. And you're right, it is a war, but it's, as you know, more of just to be for posterity, informational, which leads to financial, right? Which is why all this, the reset has to change, because it's just disproportionate, right? These countries have been upside down in their currencies because it hasn't been backed by anything, on purpose with corruption. Same with you in Canada, same with us in the US. They've got plenty of assets, as we can see, to back it. I don't know if you saw it, but Argentina just came out with a recent discovery. Well, they've known for some time, but I'm saying that they've optically presented to the world now. We put this article up on Telegram a few days ago. Argentina has some of the largest gold and silver mine reserves now in the world. And no surprise that President Trump started with Javier Milei, who's really been cleaning up that country full scale, right? Talking about a war. And that was sort of the baseline for how he's going to treat a lot of these other countries with respect to reciprocal tariffs or mirroring, right? It's going to be zero across the board at some point. That's part of and parcel, as you know, of the level playing field, right? So you're absolutely right on that in terms of there's a war going on, but it's what we call the silent war. So, and again, I know you're just one person, but what, from your experiential witnessing and analysis, in a broad question, how are you seeing Canada in your little corner of the world that you're in? Are people standing up against COVID? Are they realizing that they were conned? Are they starting to take decisive measures, or is their attitudinal mindset with how they deal with their health and doctors? Do you think that position is shifting a little bit?
I think that look, there's a big difference between what the average Canadian is thinking and what he's portrayed to be thinking. And this is part of the control of the information, basically in the media, that we're suffering under. So it's very, very difficult to say with any certainty, what the public view is. But I think the average person on the street realizes in Canada there's something deliriously wrong in Canada, that the courts aren't functioning, and that basic elements of governance are not only no longer working for their interests, but are working against their interests, and in fact are one of their biggest security risks. So Canadians probably share, on average, a lot of the US president's views on Canada. He's not alone in thinking that the Canadian government has a systemic problem with corruption. And that poses a problem for our trading partners, and it poses a problem for us as citizens.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't sound radically different than what we're going through here with the US as a wake up operation. Because again, everybody on this channel, and I would suspect on your end, is closely aligned with already, knowing this stuff's been going on for quite some time. And just it's we're trying to pick up our brothers and sisters along with us to get them safe to shore as much as possible. And you can only do that to a certain extent, but you do the best you can, and let God do the rest. So it's going to be very compelling, I think is a decent word, to see how this all shakes itself out in the weeks and months ahead.
John, when I look at the scene, and you asked the question, how are people reacting?
Mhm.
I I can't help but think that under any normal circumstances, we would have seen a heck of a lot more reaction than what we've witnessed to date. And it kind of confirms to me, perhaps, again, when I change the lens and move from a peacetime lens to a wartime lens, and I think in terms of cognitive warfare, information warfare, I start wondering, is the warfare so sophisticated that it can so change the public perception that it mollifies the public? And that's kind of the thought that comes to mind now, because if in fact we were attacked, if in fact there was a mass casualty event, the two reactions you would expect from, from human beings, they're up at two strongest traits. The first would be to respond to the attack, to survive the attack, to recognize that it was there. And the second was to innovate, because if the attack is of a novel manner, then you have to respond in a novel manner. So I think that's the kind of, discourse that allows me to understand these very strange times we're going through, where it's not just unusual events we're living, but it's also unusual reactions that are and are not happening in the public.
You agreed, and it's all part and parcel of a process, right? A wake-up call is what we call spiritual or emotional puberty. Everybody reaches it, much like physical puberty, at different times. Some people get it early, some people get in the middle, some people get it later, and it's much the relative same concept. So with that in mind, I think that that's probably might account for some of the timing shifts of when you're seeing people get it versus not getting it. And then there's cognitive dissonance, there's brainwashing, MK Ultra, and then there's just straight up denial. It's pride and ego play a major role in this. People don't want to admit that they were wrong or that they were conned, and COVID is a seminal example of that. And then to realize that you're doing your best to put food on the table for your family, only to find that your government was poisoning the very food supply you thought was to protect your family, was actually to vilify them, and financial, and it goes on and on and on down the line. And this is, I think, just a necessary step in the long range process of getting us over to the Rubicon at the other side you were referring to earlier. So I know. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
But there is a term I've been using to try and explain this to myself, John, although you eloquently described it there. And people refer to Stockholm syndrome, and I've been referring to Canada syndrome. And I'm wondering if actually many of our Western countries are suffering from the same syndrome right now. That there has been a long period of cognitive formation, and now we're being faced with a set of facts which really force a completely different lens of understanding. And I'm hoping that that explains the delay, that we're all in some sense suffering from Canada syndrome or Stockholm syndrome. And we're going to wake up one morning and people are actually going to start waking up.
I think you said it all right there. I think you nailed it full stop, Daniel. So I know you don't have any obviously personal websites or information to share given to protect your anonymity and that you're retired, but we'll of course put Norman's links for Gifts and Go for his cause in the description to help our good brother out in his absence for this podcast. But is there any thoughts or anything you'd like to share in closing to the audience today?
Only that I'm going to refer people to someone, actually, Colonel Towner Watkins.
Okay.
And she's been doing a lot of work around this point I'm trying to make, that people need to shift their point of view, their lens. And she really has done yeoman's work on this. And I would like to give credit where credit is due. And she's on Rumble as well. And so I would encourage people to look her up and have a look at some of the work she's done under the title Gladio.
Great. I'll get that link from you, and we'll put that link in the description, of course, along with Norman's Gifts and Go.
Perfect.
Daniel Mesrobian, thank you for being here and giving us all of your wonderful insights. As always, appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you again in the near future.
Thanks for the opportunity, John.
Thank you, Dan.